Department.
My
but
time is up. I'm just trying to get an answer. So, okay, yes, I'm with you. But do you now think that now that that is all moved over to the State Department, do they need more resources to limit the fraud, waste, and abuse? Because
what you just saw is only the beginning. Because when a witness runs out the clock right as the pressure peaks, there's always a reason. And it's almost never the one they say out loud. Stay with me, because what's underneath this exchange changes everything about the argument they were trying to defend.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kaplan, you spoke about issues and accountability at the UN and mentioned that we should tighten mandatory disclosure requirements and add clear consequences for failure to comply. Can you provide some more details on what you think that should look like, and would you recommend additional auditing and transparency tools?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that question. It's just a constant source of frustration. It should frustrate every single American taxpayer where money is going to the United Nations, where money continues to go to UN agencies. Again, they're a one bucket of recipient. You have UN agencies, NGOs, and contractors. When it comes to the UN, we have the least enforcement remedies available. We have the least access and the least transparency in that. So I think there's absolutely means to tighten up. In the 2024 Appropriations Act, there's a specific clause, Section 7048, if you're keeping score at home, that requires the Secretary of State to seek to implement in all agreements with the UN access for the USAid IG, State IG, and GAO. That is essential, and failure to comply with that should either result in not receiving an award or reward remedies for noncompliance.
All right, well, I appreciate that, and I agree. I want to go with this logic for a second that because there was waste, fraud, and abuse in USAID, we should get rid of it, right? Which, that was the argument. I assume you would agree that in a $7 trillion budget, we could probably find, in fact, we have found waste, fraud, and abuse in every department, right?
That's why you have inspectors general to root it out.
That's right. So there's waste, fraud, and abuse in the Pentagon, right?
Correct.
And there's waste, fraud, and abuse in DHS.
Yes.
In fact, we just saw the other day, $200 million, right, to be spent on advertising, right? That sounds like a waste to me. I mean, it was more money that was spent on the last Jurassic Park movie or one of the Lord of the Rings movies or one of the Harry Potter movies. I think the Barbie movie was less expensive. In fact, I think every movie except one that was nominated for an Oscar was less expensive than what Kristi Noem spent. To spend $200 million, Kristi Noem, and not get nominated by an Oscar, I think shows their liberal bias. So there's definitely waste, right? But no one's talking about getting rid of those places. No one's talking about, just because we're spending, $9 million on crab legs in the Pentagon, or $220 million on furniture in the Pentagon, or, $100,000 on a Steinway piano in the Pentagon. No one's talking about getting rid of the Pentagon just because there's waste, fraud, and abuse, right? That would be unreasonable, Mr. Kaplan. You agree?
No one's talking about getting rid of those agencies.
Right, of course, right? So it would be, and that's where the disconnect is here, is that somehow because this agency, no different than all the other agencies, we could sit, HUD, Department of Agriculture, we could go through them, right? There's waste, fraud, and abuse, and we owe it to the American people, by the way, to eliminate that waste, fraud, and abuse. There's no excuse for that, okay? We owe it to them. But in the search of trying to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse doesn't mean we should get rid of an entire agency. No, we should eliminate the waste, fraud, and abuse from those agencies, because all of these agencies still have important functions. Obviously, the Pentagon, we're not going to get rid of the Pentagon, even though they haven't been able to pass an audit 8 years in a row. There's over $2.5 trillion, let me say that again, over $2.5 trillion missing in the Pentagon, like real money, okay? And no one's talking about getting rid of it. And so, that's the function of the problem I have. Look, in my own household budget, right? I can tell you my kids are definitely, there's tons of waste in my family budget based on what my kids like to spend, okay? There's definitely abuse going on. And based on the amount of boxes that show up in my house every day, my wife is definitely committing fraud, okay? But the point is, I'm not getting rid of these people, right? What am I gonna do? I'm gonna sit them down at the kitchen table and I'm gonna say, we need to spend less, right? What are we spending on? We didn't have that conversation here with USAID. We never got to say, hey, look, these programs, delete them. These things, get rid of them, okay? Every other agency somehow is getting that benefit of the doubt, right? We're giving that benefit of the doubt to the Pentagon. I want to end with this. Now that these functions are going to move over to the State Department, all right, Mr. Kaplan, do you think the State Department has the resources, the personnel, to do all of this oversight, the grant oversight, to the capacity to handle all of this without adding more personnel to the State Department?
Let me begin with this, Congressman Moskowitz. I can assure you that the same vile predators that sought to steal from USAID or divert funds to terrorist organizations or sexually abuse minors like they did in the Ebola response will try to do the same thing at state.
Yeah, and look, that's all terrible. We all support clamping down on that and getting rid of it. My question is, do you think the State Department at this juncture needs additional resources now that they have all this additional responsibility?
Contrary to media reports, foreign assistance programs are not dead, and there are billions and billions and billions of dollars now being spent and administered by not only State Department,
my
but
time is up. I'm just trying to get an answer. So, okay, yes, I'm with you. But do you now think that now that that is all moved over to the State Department, do they need more resources to limit the fraud, waste, and abuse? Because otherwise, aren't we going to wind up in the same situation where there's going to be fraud, waste, and abuse because we're not investing in that oversight?
Maximum oversight is essential, and that's what we brought as the IG for USAID. And when you have billions going out in complex emergency environments and money spent overseas in areas controlled by terrorist organizations and any armed group, you need adequate staffing, people, good monitoring, and an effective IG to oversee and investigate any misuse of those funds.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
What we just watched was not a clash over abstract numbers, nor a routine budgetary squabble. The record shows a methodical dismantling of a Trump-aligned argument, the claim that USAID's waste justifies eliminating or hollowing out the agency itself. Congressman Moskowitz approached the issue with a simple structure: identify the logic, apply that logic consistently, and expose the contradiction that emerges. And at every stage, the transcript shows the same result. When the argument is pushed outside its political context and into a neutral framework, it collapses under its own weight. To break this down, we should begin with what occurred in the room. Moskowitz pressed the witness not on ideology, but on consistency. He began by confirming with Kaplan that waste, fraud, and abuse exist in every major federal department, a point the witness did not dispute. At each step, the Pentagon, Homeland Security, even the household analogy Moskowitz used to illustrate ordinary financial waste, Kaplan agreed with the premise. Waste exists across government. Inspectors general exist to root it out. And waste alone has never been treated as grounds for eliminating an entire agency. What the transcript actually reveals is a deliberate use of that agreement to expose the flaw in the Trump-aligned position. When Moskowitz said, because there was waste, fraud, and abuse in USAID, we should get rid of it, right? Which that was the argument. He was not mischaracterizing the rhetoric that has circulated around foreign assistance. He was documenting it. Once he established that this logic applies nowhere else, not at the Pentagon, not at DH, not in any other department with documented failures, inefficiencies, or missing funds, the underlying contradiction became unavoidable. The witness had already acknowledged the presence of waste in every major agency, and yet only one agency was being held up as uniquely dispensable. This is not a matter of interpretation. The asymmetry is present in the transcript. When Moskowitz listed examples of Pentagon waste, crab legs, furniture, a Steinway piano, billions unaccounted for after 8 consecutive failed audits, the witness did not contest the numbers, nor did he argue that these failures should lead to eliminating the Department of Defense. No clarification was offered. None was attempted. Instead, Kaplan repeatedly affirmed the broader point. Waste is real, oversight is necessary, but the presence of waste has never been sufficient to justify making an entire department disappear. When you strip away the rhetorical framing, what remains is a documented contradiction. The Trump-aligned argument treats USAID as uniquely disqualifying because of financial misuse, while the same standard, if applied evenly, would threaten every major federal institution. Moskowitz pressed this by grounding the comparison in everyday logic. If household waste does not justify eliminating the household, why would government waste justify eliminating the agency? The point was not comedic, though he used humor to soften the transition, but structural. The presence of waste does not end the conversation. Oversight does. The record shows that as the questioning turned toward the State Department's absorption of USAID functions, the dynamic shifted. Moskowitz asked whether the department, now tasked with expanded oversight, had the resources, personnel, and capacity to handle the new workload without additional staffing. This was not an ideological inquiry, it was a logistical one. The witness attempted to pivot to the dangers of fraud, sexual abuse, and the diversion of funds to terrorist groups. These concerns were serious, but they did not answer the specific question. Moskowitz acknowledged the gravity of those risks, repeatedly redirected to the operational issue, and asked again, does the State Department need more resources to prevent the same waste, fraud, and abuse critics use as a basis for eliminating USAID? The transcript shows the witness did not provide a direct answer until the final seconds. Instead, he reiterated abstract principles. Maximum oversight is essential, and you need adequate staffing, without connecting those principles to the yes or no question before him, whether the department currently had sufficient resources. The distinction matters. The failure to give a direct answer is part of the record. It is not framed, and it is not inferred. Moskowitz stated his time was up before the witness completed his pivot, and the exchange ended without a clear resolution. What this means, in practical terms, is that the core assumption behind the Trump-aligned position, that USAID should be eliminated because it mismanaged funds, is undermined by the testimony itself. The witness did not claim USAID was uniquely negligent. He did not argue that the agency was structurally incapable of reform. Instead, he repeatedly agreed that eliminating an agency is not the standard remedy for financial misuse. Waste has been documented in every department, including the Department of Defense, yet those departments retain their budgets, missions, and institutional protections. The contradiction is documented. Eliminating USAID is not consistent with the treatment of any other federal institution with similar oversight failures. The transcript also reveals what was not said, or, more precisely, what was never justified. At no point did the witness articulate why USAID should be treated differently from every other department with comparable oversight challenges. He did not argue that USAID's waste was categorically more severe. He did not claim its financial risks were qualitatively distinct. He did not present evidence that the agency was institutionally incapable of reform. The pattern here is not subtle. When pressed for a factual distinction, none was provided. Furthermore, the exchange exposes a deeper structural issue. The argument for eliminating USAID is rooted not in oversight metrics, but in political posture. If financial misuse were the true threshold, the Department of Defense, with trillions unaccounted for over multiple audit cycles, would face the same scrutiny. When Moskowitz noted that over $2.5 trillion remain missing, the witness did not dispute the number. More importantly, he did not extend the elimination logic to the Pentagon. The absence of such an extension is not oversight, it is selective application. When we widen the lens, the implications become clearer. The hearing was not solely about USAID's performance. It was about which agencies are granted the benefit of the doubt and which are targeted for elimination based on political alignment. Foreign assistance has long been portrayed in Trump-aligned rhetoric as extravagant, corrupt, or unnecessary. A characterization that stands in tension with the complexity of global instability, humanitarian response, and national security strategy. The transcript documents how easily this rhetoric falters when subjected to internal comparison. If waste is intolerable at USAID, it must also be intolerable at the Pentagon. If misuse justifies elimination in one case, it must justify elimination in all cases. The witness did not dispute Moskowitz's premise, and therefore did not escape the logical consequence. The final exchange, the one we opened with, underscores the point. As Moskowitz pressed for a direct answer, the witness pivoted to global danger, child exploitation, and the threat of terrorist diversion. These are serious issues, but they do not answer the central question whether the State Department is equipped to oversee the billions now under its jurisdiction. Moskowitz asked it plainly, repeatedly, and without rhetorical flourish. The witness, after multiple pivots, eventually provided a general principle that adequate staffing is essential without stating whether existing staffing met the threshold. That answer will matter later, and not in his favor. The distinction between principle and practice is crucial in oversight testimony. The transcript shows he did not bridge that gap. Taken together, the hearing reveals a consistent pattern. Moskowitz used the witness's own concessions to dismantle a Trump-aligned argument without resorting to caricature. The witness confirmed that waste exists everywhere. He confirmed oversight is the remedy. He did not argue USAID is unique. And he did not justify eliminating it under standards that would decimate every other major department if applied universally. The contradiction is not rhetorical. It is documented. The record shows that when the elimination argument is held to its own logic, it fails. The bigger picture is not simply about USAID or the State Department. It is about the selective use of waste as a political instrument rather than an oversight issue. The transcript demonstrates that when the standard is applied consistently, the Trump-aligned argument loses coherence. Waste is a reason to improve oversight, not dismantle institutions, and the witness, despite multiple opportunities, provided no evidence to the contrary. The final verdict is straightforward. The testimony did not substantiate the claim that USAID's waste is uniquely disqualifying. It did not justify eliminating the agency. And it did not demonstrate that the standard being applied to USAID is the standard applied anywhere else. Moskowitz methodically exposed that discrepancy. The contradiction is on the record, and the implications extend far beyond this hearing. If you want more breakdowns like this where powerful people get pressed on the record, hit subscribe and drop your take in the comments. Who do you think came out stronger in this hearing, and what was the one moment that changed the whole exchange?